It's time now for us to do another flyby of 3 books in the Bible. So far we've done Genesis through 2nd Chronicles, and today we pick up Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. I hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, I hope you give some feedback as to what you're learning from it. And of course it's on video, so you can go back time and time again and look at these things. It's not meant to be exhaustive, to do a chapter by chapter, certainly not verse by verse. A look of the book, just give you an overall picture of what you're going to be reading when you pick up the book. So just look at it maybe as an introduction to each book. So today we look at Ezra first of all, and it carries the name of the book Ezra because it was probably written by Ezra. But there's something about Ezra that you need to know. When you first open it up in chapter 1, it talks about in the first year of King Cyrus that the children of Israel are told they can go back to the promised land. When we finished 2nd Chronicles, the children of Israel have been carried off into captivity. And now about 536 BC, 500 years before Christ roughly, now the children of Israel are now allowed to return and begin rebuilding their lives. And one of the first things that has to be done is the temple has to be rebuilt. The walls have to be rebuilt. That's going to be Nehemiah. And the children of Israel then have to reestablish the priesthood. Who's in the priesthood? Who's not in the priesthood? That's all in the book of Ezra. So what I would tell you to do, and when you're reading the book of Ezra, understand it's divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is chapter 1 through chapter 6. And it talks about some of the political things that are going on. The children of Israel are numbered, but then they also have to go through the checks of the genealogy to see who is part of the tribe. And of course, each of the 12 tribes have been carried off into captivity. Now they're returning, and the numbers are quite drastically low, as you can imagine. So that's part of the book of Ezra, is getting those numbers read about and understood what's taking place. And then the political maneuvering of people trying to get the children of Israel. There's resistance about them returning, and then there's a throwback, and letters are exchanged, and the work is stopped, and all those kinds of intrigues take place. And it isn't until chapter 7, now there's only 10 chapters, it isn't until chapter 7 that Ezra shows up. So the 60% of the book, Ezra's not there. It's history that's taken place 80 to 100 years beforehand. So Ezra 1 to 6 is about 536 BC. And then when Ezra comes in chapter 7, if you'll check in the margins of your Bible, if you have the dates, you'll see it's about 80 or 90 years later that Ezra shows up. And Ezra is a scribe. He is given a responsibility as a leader to lead the children of Israel back into this spiritually as well as physically, to get right with God and rebuild the temple and have things once again established. One of the things that's really sad about the book of Ezra is chapter 10, that many of the people of Israel have married strange wives. And when I say strange, that means they've married outside of Israel. They've married Moabites and Hittites and Amorites. They've just married outside the nation of Israel. And so God tells them, Ezra just rents his clothes and sits before the Lord and says, what must we do? And ends up, chapter 10, the children of Israel end up giving their wives and the children from those marriages completely up. And I can't imagine the heartache and the suffering that they went through, but it was necessary that they keep the line of Israel, the seed of Israel, pure, and marry only among Israelites. So that's the book of Ezra. Now we come to the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah comes in really time-wise between Ezra chapter 1 through 6 and Ezra chapter 7. So you could stop reading at Ezra chapter 6, read the book of Nehemiah, see what takes place, and then come back to what takes place in Ezra chapter 7 through 10. But the books are laid out as they are, not chronologically, but Nehemiah comes back to rebuild the walls because it's really not going to do much good to rebuild the temple in Ezra chapter 7, 8, 9 if there's no walls to protect it. So Nehemiah comes about 10 years before Ezra and begins rebuilding the wall. He also suffers all kinds of resistance, people making fun. You'll read one part in the book of Nehemiah that they have a trowel in one hand where they're rebuilding the wall, and they have a sword in the other hand. And they are having to fight and at least protect themselves, or at least the threat of fighting, as well as building at the same time. So they are going through this process. Again, there's threatenings of having the movement stopped, but eventually everything goes well and the building for the walls is completed. It only takes 52 days to repair that wall. And that's quite a miracle to think about, that less than in 2 months they've rebuilt that wall all the way around Jerusalem. And it's just had to be because of the hand of God. Ezra and Nehemiah, two very special men in the Bible with books of the Bible named after them, and you'll learn about God in both of those chapters of fighting and resisting and standing up for right, even when the odds are against you and when you have a lot of opposition. Now we come to the book of Esther, and the book of Esther is a unique book of the Bible because it's the only book of the Bible out of 66 in which the name Lord doesn't occur. So God is behind the scenes and working, but he doesn't show up in a personal way, not even his name. So Esther is named one of the two books of the Bible named after a woman, Ruth being the other. And you contrast those two books. Ruth is a Gentile who marries a Jew. Esther is a Jew who marries a Gentile. And the Gentile she marries is King Ahasuerus, the king of Persia. So Esther becomes the queen of Persia. And the story is all about a man named Haman, who is a bad guy, to put it in movie terms, and Mordecai, who is a good guy. Mordecai is the cousin of Esther, but he has raised her as a daughter because her parents have passed away. She was an orphan, so he has raised her. And she is in now the queen. You can read about how she becomes queen in chapter 1 and chapter 2. She's finds out that Haman, because he hates Mordecai, wants to have all the Jews killed. And so a date is set in the 13th month in which all the Jews are going to be annihilated, much like the Holocaust. And Haman is the one who's had that set up. Haman wants to have Mordecai hung on gallows and has gallows built to have that done. But it's a twist of fate, and with the hand of God in showing his ability to work behind the scenes and turn the heart of the king like the rivers of water whithersoever he will, as the book of Proverbs tells us. The king life was saved by Mordecai, but nothing was ever done to award Mordecai. And so the king decides, I've got to do something to award him. About that time, Haman comes in, and the king says, what should be done for the man who is the king wants to honor? And Haman thinks to himself, well, who would the king want to honor more than me? And he says, thinking it's going to happen to him, let him ride on the king's horse. Let him wear the king's ring. Let all the people bow as he goes by. And his mouth must have dropped. I'm sure he kept his composure before the king. But the king says, go and have this done for Mordecai. And so Haman goes out and has to lead the horse and proclaim before everyone, this is the man in whom the king honors, and it's his deadly enemy, his mortal enemy, Mordecai. In the meantime, Esther's not told anyone that she's a Jew. The king doesn't know. Haman doesn't know. No one in the house knows. And so she invites the king and Haman to dinner one night. Actually happens 2 times, but we'll just cut, since we're just doing an overview. The second night when Esther has Haman and the king there, the king says, what can I do for you, Esther? Up to half my kingdom. She says, I just want you to save my people. We're set for annihilation. And the king says, well, who made such an order? And she says, this wicked Haman. And he gets so angry, fiercely angry, that Haman wants to kill the queen, that he immediately has Haman face covered, and he's taken out and he's hung on the very gallows in which he had built for Mordecai. It's quite a story. 10 chapters, and every year the Jews still celebrate that story in their time. It's called the Feast of Purim, and it takes place every year. They dress up in costumes much like our children do around Halloween, and they celebrate the fact that the Jews were able to save themselves against that threat of annihilation given out by Haman, who hated the Jews. All right, that's 3 books, and next time we will look further along as we do these flyby studies. I hope you're finding them interesting and helpful. God bless you.